So we're going to be going over two audio effects today. One is an EQ8 and the other one is a reverb. So the first thing I'm going to look at is an EQ8. EQ stands for Equalizer. So let's go into our audio effects tab here on the left panel. I'm going to find the EQ8. I'm going to click, drag, and put it on my snare track. So there it is in the effects section down here at the bottom. Like a spectrum, an EQ or equalizer also shows the different frequencies that the sound is playing. Except with an EQ, we can now cut out certain frequencies or we can raise certain frequencies. This particular EQ is called an EQ8 because it has 8 different bands. So you can cut or raise multiple different frequencies along the spectrum. If this square down here is blue, that means that band is activated. And if it's gray, that means it's deactivated. So let's go ahead and deactivate all of them but number 1 here. Each band has 8 different options for cutting. Let's go through one at a time. So the first one we see is a sharp low cut. So what this does is it cuts any of the frequencies to the left, and as we know now, those are the lower frequencies. So that's why it's called a low cut, because it cuts off the low frequencies. Essentially everything to the left of this blue line in this area here is getting cut off. If I drag this band all the way to the right, you're going to start hearing less and less of the low sounds and more of the high sounds, because that's all we have left after cutting off the lows. The next one is also a low cut, but it's just not as sharp as that first one. This one here is a low shelf, so it doesn't completely cut off the lows, but it does get rid of some of the lows. The next one here is a bell. With this one you can pinpoint different frequencies along the spectrum, and you can lower them or raise them. Then this is another deeper bell. And we're getting into the high cuts now. The next one is a high shelf, similar to a low shelf, but now instead of cutting some of the lows, you're now cutting some of the higher frequencies off. And the next one is a high cut, similar to the low cut, but now we are cutting off everything to the right of that blue line. So everything in this section here is getting cut off. And if I drag this high cut from the right to the left, you'll start hearing more and more of the low sounds, because we are now cutting the high frequencies out. And just to be clear, this doesn't change the pitch of the song at all. All this is doing is cutting off certain frequencies. So one way to use this is, let's say we play this snare. And as we mentioned earlier, this now is dominant in this section. So because we know the snare is dominant in this section, what we can do is we can shave off or cut some of the other frequencies that we do not need to hear. What this does is it leaves room for other sounds in your song. As you're developing your song, you're adding multiple sound layers. So what this does is, by cutting off the frequencies that are not necessarily being played as loud in a certain sound, we're leaving room for other sounds to fill in those frequency gaps. We will get into mixing much later in this course, but just wanted to point out what an EQ is used for.